Having the cooperation, I mean, I can't say it's all my own work, because I had these very skilled programmers, technical programmers, like Ralph Pienaar and Art Rebel, who could write the software. I didn't have the time, I don't think, or the skill to actually write the software, although I could communicate with him. And that's where my background in computer science came in, because I knew what was possible, and I could specify to them, what I wanted them to do. So that was it was worth having that background. So Stelpump, and then I did a lot of stuff with Stelpump. I did a lot of clinical work with Stelpump. I did a lot of training in the theatres. I don't know if Swanee worked with me in the theatre using the old Stelpump.
No, I definitely. You had several versions of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Updates, upgrades.
And then, of course, at that time, we had developed our own EEG machine. And that was also interesting, because this is an interesting piece of history. In 1992, suddenly a delegation from Somchem walked into my office. And they said, there have been instructions to diversify.
Somchem,
a division of the munitions manufacturer. This semi-state, Denel, it's a division of Denel. Now they had seen what was coming, that the ANC were going to take over the country. And they had received instructions from above that they must not just be manufacturers of weapons of mass destruction. They must diversify, and what could be better than getting into the medical technology? And they had a whole number of some very bright engineers at their disposal. This delegation walked into my office and said, "You run this Bureau for Bioengineering, can you help us? Have you got any projects for us?" And so I said, "Yes." They said, "Well, before you start, we don't want Mickey Mouse projects. We want to do something that's really worth doing." So I said, "Well, we've developed this primitive EEG machine. Why don't you develop an EEG machine, and one that you can market commercially?" So suddenly the red carpet was laid out for me. No lack of funds, no lack of computer programmers and electronics engineers and whatever. And in a very short time we put together a IBM, well at that time a Microsoft-based EEG machine that did Fourier transform and all sorts of graphics, which worked really well. And now this was interesting, because it was, with all that expertise, it was fairly straightforward to develop a very sophisticated piece of apparatus. And there was a World Congress on in The Hague.
I remember you taking it there.
And before we did that, we took it to Britain and had it approved by the Bureau of Standards in Britain, that it met up with all the safety regulations for medical devices, etc. That was hugely complicated to from scratch write up the specifications and find out what the specifications are for safety in electronic devices. And there are, what's the organization, the IOC? Anyway, there are a number of manuals that are there that provide these specs, and you've got to make sure that your electronic apparatus meets all those specs. And that was approved, so had a stall at the Hague, and at that time other people had been also developing EEG devices. They were just coming on the scene.
Right.
And so, you know, we did things like spectral edge, median frequency,
Yeah.
and I visited two pioneers in EEG monitoring and also TCI in Germany at the time, during that time,
Yeah.
Helmut Schwilden and Jürgen Schuttler. And they were very much, they had already started this long before I did. I actually got the idea from them when Arthur Bell wanted to do a project, and he eventually got his M thesis on developing this machine. It was medium frequency, spectral edge, and it actually worked quite well if you knew how to interpret it. And there was a tremendous amount of interest from all over, guys from India and from all over, and the guys at the stand were taking down the names, etc. And then suddenly, when we got back to South Africa, the whole project fizzled out. And we had also worked on other things.
Denel pulled it.
Denel pulled the plug on it.
Yeah.
And we had developed other things, like at that time, pulse oximeters were in very short supply and very expensive.
Yeah.
So what we developed was a multiplexer for a pulse oximeter for the pediatric ward, whereby you could have one pulse oximeter which could be attached to several cots, monitoring several
What's it
cots.
called? A multi?
A multiplexer.
Yeah.
So you would monitor one baby for a while, and then switch over to another baby.
A bit like the mass spec at Baragwanath, that went from theatre to theatre.
Yeah, okay, I didn't know that, yeah.
So if they had 11 theatres,
Yeah,
you'd have to wait until your theatre came up, you could see what the concentrations
Yeah,
of your gases
that's right.
were.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that was in the neonatal ward.
We developed that for neonatal purposes, but before that could go much further, it was also, the plug was pulled on that. Suddenly,
Really?
all the projects. We had several projects going. We had a project going that was started by Peter Fourie for monitoring newborn babies to detect, to prevent to prevent cot deaths.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a pad on which the baby would lie,
Yes.
and then it would detect movement or lack of movement. So an alarm would go off when the baby stopped breathing.
You also showed that at The Hague.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did that never...
That didn't go anywhere either.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing.
We also developed a nerve stimulator.
It was an apnea law.
Mm.
So these were all started by Denel, or encouraged by Denel, and then...
Yeah, they were ideas that I had started, and they were official projects that were running.
Yes.
And then I can't remember what year it was, but it was, I think, just before the elections they pulled the plug on it.
Plus and minus 1993.
94, yeah.
94.
Yeah. And I estimate them in personnel salaries
Yeah.
and other resources, they must have spent about 4 million rand
Yeah.
during that time. Yeah, but it was terribly exciting.
Yeah.
Gave me a lot of insight.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was that these guys weren't good at marketing. Although
Yeah.
they didn't pull the plug immediately after we got back from The
Yeah.
Hague. They did attempt to market the
Yeah.
EEG machine, but they had no idea of the interface between the seller and the buyer.
Yes.
They were used to developing something that some guy in the army, some little troopy, would have to use, and you know, if it wasn't user friendly,
Yeah.
tough luck, troopy.
Yeah.
Go for it. You do
Yeah.
it, like
Yeah.
we say.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the attitude.
And you weren't able to sell what you'd done to international companies like Hewlett Packard.
No. By that time, that was interesting. The BIS company
Yeah.
had done a startup, and I was actually at Stanford at the time visiting Steve Schaefer when they had the first meeting with the guys who were developing the BIS, and I had to sign a confidentiality agreement
Yeah.
because they said, right, we're going to measure spectral range, medium frequency, all that, but what we also want to do is look at the phase relationships, and this is the strength of the BIS. So the BIS is not an ideal system. I think that interpreting spectral edge, medium frequency, etc., is just as valuable.
Yeah.
But of course, the BIS got all the marketing behind it
Yeah.
and all that. So, yeah,
Right. No, thanks, Jeff.
yeah. That's not all. It's still lots.
Yeah, no, sure, I realise that. Alright.
So, yeah.